Hi, I'm Hilary Walczak, the Grove City College Archivist. March is Women's History Month, so I figured what better time to go over some of Grove City College's women's history than now. Now we have so many amazing women's stories throughout our history that I figured I would just focus on some of our female firsts. Starting with the founding of the college and Harriet Libby Dixon. So I could do an entire video on the founding of the college, so I'll try to keep it brief. In the 1800s, education is so different than what we have today. You had one-room schoolhouses, and standards and curriculum changed from school to school. That made it really difficult for rural communities to be able to prep their students to be able to go on to college. So in 1858, Reverend Richard Thompson, who was the pastor of the local Presbyterian church in town, decided he wanted to create a college prep program for some of these students in the community. He continued it on until he left and a new pastor came to town, William Dixon. His wife, Harriet Libby Dixon, did most of the teaching for this school. And they would continue on, but as the program grew and as there was more interest, they realized it was too much for a small church to handle. They hired Isaac Cutler to serve as the principal, and they created Pine Grove Normal Academy, which served as a teacher's prep school as well as a college prep. Isaac Cutler would take this school, continue to grow it, and eventually it would become Grove City College. And Harriet Libby Dixon continued to teach under Isaac Cutler until she left when William took a position in Ohio. In 1906, she passed away, and all of her obituaries credit her with the founding of the college as well as being the first teacher. She was so highly respected in the community that Isaac Cutler had her body lie in state at his house so that community members as well as former students could come and pay their respects. She also had one more female first, as she was the first woman to receive an honorary degree from the college. This was in 1885, and it was the first commencement that we were a college. Our next female first is going to be our first music professor. She was a professor of voice and piano. Johanna Christina Pielman came to Grove City College in 1893 with her husband, Herman Pielman. Now that name may sound familiar, as he was the director of the music conservatory that had just been created at Grove City College, as well as he's the composer of our alma mater. Together, the two of them taught music at Grove City College. However, Johanna was an opera singer over in Germany, and so when the opportunity came for her to join the New York Metropolitan Opera, she took the chance. She actually was in San Francisco in 1906, where she was practicing at the Palace Hotel. The great earthquake of San Francisco in 1906 happened, and she was crushed by a piano. She was injured and she did survive. However, a few years later, she became sick. They pretty much assume it was cancer, and she died in 1909 at the age of 30. Now we're going to fast forward to the fall of 1918 when Grace McCune took on the role as first woman editor-in-chief of the Ouija, the college yearbook, producing the 1919 college yearbook. In the fall of 1918, hundreds of students had left for war to fight in Europe for World War I. They hadn't yet come back as the war hadn't finished, and women were taking on many of the roles that men had once filled. This is when Grace took the reins of being editor-in-chief of the Ouija. She is said to have been able to bring the best out of people, as well as she had a knack for executive ability. It was in this yearbook that she was said to have brought back the class of 1920 when it was on the brink of disintegration, and that she was able to successfully bring out the close of this yearbook. She would somewhat lead the way for other women to take on roles at the college. However, the next editor-in-chief of the Ouija to be a woman wasn't until 1944 during World War II. It's in that same year that Grace McCune has taken over the Ouija that we have our first female editor-in-chief of the Collegian, the college's newspaper. Isabel Blyholder, class of 1919. The yearbook that year reads, "To her comes the first honor of being the first girl to act as editor-in-chief of the Collegian, and she filled the position with marked success."
At this time, editor-in-chief of the Collegian was a very important role held in high regard across campus. Isabel took the lead with World War I still going on in Europe, women across the country fighting for their right to vote, and the flu of 1918 was still killing people around the world. And this is when Isabel Blyholder wrote provocative editorials.
Her probably most scandalous article is entitled "The Girls" in April of 1920. In this article, she goes on to critique and comment on the fact that the administration had very strict rules for women and men hardly had any. She calls out the fact that women took on these roles when men were gone at war and they are not weak and can handle more. Really, the main focus of the fight was the fact that women had such early curfews that they could hardly get any of their studying and schoolwork done. And let's just be honest, this is the time when women aren't even allowed to wear pants, and they had to have a chaperone if they rode in a car. So yes, their curfews were pretty early. She would open the doors for more women to take on role of editor-in-chief of the Collegian, as our next woman editor-in-chief would come 2 years later in 1922, Helen Calderwood. You might recognize that name, but you probably remember best as First Lady Helen Harker. We're going to fast forward to the 1960s for our first woman to letter in a varsity sport. Ruth Bogart, class of 1963, has the honor of being the first woman to letter in a varsity sport, as well as being the first woman to have 4 letters in a varsity sport. Now, Ruth never really saw herself as a pioneer. However, she really was ahead of her time, as across the country, women weren't competing in athletics at a varsity level. But when Ruth came to school in 1959 and saw that the college had a rifle team, she didn't think twice about signing up. She had grown up shooting with her father and had competed throughout high school. So she automatically knew this is where she belonged. There wasn't a lot of pushback from the school. The only big concern they had was, who's going to be her chaperone? In an oral history a few years ago, Ruth had shared the story that there was one match where she got a call and said, "I'm sorry, you're not going to be able to compete. Your chaperone isn't going to be able to attend." Now, they had been having a phys ed teacher kind of go along with her, Miss George. However, Miss George couldn't attend this one. So Ruth called her father and said, "Hey, Dad, will you come be my chaperone?" He immediately said yes, because that meant that he got to go watch her shoot. Ruth led the team to successful wins throughout her career, having a 44-19 overall record over her 4 years, including a Western Pennsylvania Rifle League championship. Upon her graduation, she led a team of girls to Penn State University, where she then set the Penn State range record while coaching the team. Ruth would go on to be a teacher in states like New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Florida, and Germany, and spent 15 years with the U.S. Treasury Department. Now, Ruth still to this day does not view herself as a pioneer. However, she is really glad that she was able to open the door for more women to be able to participate in athletics. And our last person today is the first woman to graduate as an officer from our ROTC program, Sue Ellen Carson Wright Novak, class of 1973. Now, Sue Ellen had always wanted to be in the Air Force. So it wasn't shocking that when the ROTC at Grove City finally allowed women to join, she immediately signed up with one other girl, Gail Opplinger Nelson. Sue had always wanted to be in the Air Force. And you might say, really? What child comes up with that plan? Well, Sue Ellen did. When she was in 3rd grade, she was asked to draw a picture of what she wanted to be when she grew up. So, Sue Ellen drew a picture of herself as a 2nd lieutenant saluting a major outside of an Air Force barracks. The teacher questioned her, and Sue Ellen said, "Well, I want to be a colonel in the Air Force stationed in Alaska." That was pretty detailed for a 3rd grader. So the teacher brought it up at parent-teacher conferences, and Sue Ellen's parents said, "Yep." Her nickname at the time from her father was Scooter, and he said, "Scooter's gonna be what Scooter's gonna be." So in 1971, the ROTC program allowed women to join for the first time. And as I had said before, only 2 women signed up. When Sue Ellen graduated in 1973 as the first officer in the ROTC program that was a woman, she went on to serve in the Air Force for 30 years. serving in Turkey during the Cold War, having been the chief commander of the blood program for the Air Force, researching and figuring out how to extend the life of blood so they could get it to war zone and remote areas. In 1995, while stationed in Alaska, Sue Ellen was promoted to colonel. She retired from the U.S. Air Force in 2003 with numerous accolades and awards. Following that, she took on the job of executive director and president of the Alaska Veterans Museum. At the time, it had just been a concept, and she turned that museum into a reality. And we are lucky enough to have her uniforms on display here at the college. Grove City College has a very rich women's history. And I only touched on a few of the first. There are many more. So if you're looking for more information on Grove City College's history, you can follow us at GCC Archives on Instagram.